just a little bit of background. Whoa, that went twice.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Suggs?
Sure. Joe Suggs. I am a manager in the System Planning and Performance Department. Shay Esparza is our evaluator. She's not with us this evening, but has done a lot of the legwork on this, and appreciate that. All right. A little bit of background. The last two times we've conducted feedback surveys were in 2014-15 and 2016-17. We were calling those our successful schools surveys. Those were done for students, family, and staff. And in the winter and spring of last year, some of our evaluation team went around and talked to various school administrators and others about their input into that survey process, and we used feedback from those conversations to inform what we should do going forward. No, it's not going to work. Okay. Using the feedback from those conversations, we determined primarily that we needed a shorter survey and a quicker reporting turnaround time for those. In the late spring, System Planning Performance made the decision to contract with Panorama for the 2018-19 surveys. The surveys for this year will be conducted with students and families. We are not planning to do a staff survey at this time.
Sorry, we had an outbreak of Christmas.
Panorama is a nationally recognized company that delivers these kinds of surveys.
Okay.
And yes.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to have to do this. I forgot we were going to do student comment first.
Okay.
We have a number of students who are waiting, so I'm terribly sorry.
No
but,
problem.
A number of
Hold
them
that
need
thought,
to,
Joe.
Yeah. Okay, my apologies to everybody. So, Ms. Hewson, do we have student comment?
And our first two students are Trip Burnett and Alex Peters.
Okay, and as you're coming down to the table, I just want to remind you the guidelines around testimony that you heard earlier still apply. With the exception that in work sessions, we're asking people to limit their comments to 2 minutes. Okay? Thank you.
My name is Trip Burnett, T-R-Y-P-P, B-U-R-N-E-T-T, and I am a senior at Alliance at Benson High School. I came here to speak because in the current iteration of the planning for the school board, planning for the sort of layout for Benson, we are not included in the space that we would need, if any, and during the whole entire remodel, we would be kicked out of Benson and without the knowledge of where we'd be going at that point in time. Now, I will not be there at that current point in time since I'm hoping to be graduating this year, but for my future students who will need this space to be able to graduate because of many different reasons, I want to make sure that they have a place to be able to be and be successful. Now, of course, there are many different factors that go into this, like budget and spacing, on whether or not you want to build more space into the Benson campus itself, or you want to expand upwards, whatever the option may be. But Alliance at Benson needs to stay there, and it needs to continue to work in the fashion that's going, because it is a very successful program and many options, because overall, I don't have official numbers on this, but I can know from looking at what's going on, Alliance at Benson and Alliance at Meek most likely raised the graduation rates for PPS due to the fact that it picks up where these students who would probably be GED bound or just a high school dropout would be able to get their diploma. Many of these students are seniors, as in myself, that may have dropped out at some point in time, or super seniors who did not really want to go back to normal high school because they are 18, turning on 19, sometimes turning on 20, and they feel a bit too old for the whole entire program. So my main point on this is in your vote on December 18th on whether or not you are going to keep the current plan or make a new plan and what's going to go on with Alliance at Benson, I would like you guys to take into consideration the students that need the most support in all this. Students such as myself, students such as Alex, and many other students among there. So that is my only comment on this, and I would just hope that you would take our situation into consideration in your planning of the Benson remodel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Alex Peters, Peters. I've always been an academic student. I've always loved school. But when regular high schools didn't work, and honestly, when the rest of the PPS school district failed me, Alliance at Benson was there for me. Alliance at Benson is the only reason I'm graduating high school. And it's like that for a lot of other students too. And one of the reasons that it's so accessible is because it's physically accessible. It's right off every MAX line except for the yellow, which is really great, you know? That's a great location. The current plan is to move Alliance while Benson is being remodeled. Benson students stay in Benson because of the equipment that's special to Benson. They can't be moved because that equipment is needed for their school. The message it sends when we are told that we have to move, even though this location is essential to our school, is that we are less important than the tools at Benson. And that's all.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elijah Sefcik and Andrew Peacock.
All right, so my name is Elijah Sefcik, Sefchick, and we're both from Benson, and we're both seniors. So we're here today to talk about the water situation currently at Benson. Every time a student wants to go get water to refill their water bottle, the further the source is from them, the less likely they will go to get water. Staying hydrated obviously is very important to student learning and health overall. A study at BBC concluded that a student's test score can increase by 5% just by drinking water. And obviously it can do other things for a student, like put you in a better mood, improve your heart health, and prevent headaches. So of course these are important things for a teen. Right now there are currently 11 total water fountains at Benson. 2 of these currently have the sticker that says they're working and lead-free, but aren't actually functional. So we hope you'd consider fixing the remainder of the water fountains, which are still unusable. Of course, adding water coolers was a good temporary fix, but they've been in action for too long, and they're not reliable. A lot of times they don't even have water in them. So fixing the rest of the water fountains would be a very positive change for the students at Benson, and also would be more cost-effective for PPS in the long run, since they don't have to buy cups and new water jugs. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Andrew Keita, Ketah. I'm adding on to what he started. So starting in the beginning of the 2016 school year, the water was tested to have large amounts of lead, and this removed all the water fountains. And although the water fountains have been added, many of them have been removed since the beginning of this school year, when some of the permanent ones have been fixed, but this didn't resolve the issue. This left students in our E-wing without functioning water fountains available to everybody, and this directly affects myself, Elijah, and hundreds of other students throughout the school day. And the location of these water coolers requires students to walk multiple minutes to get water, taking valuable time out of the classroom. So we would ask for water fountains to be fixed and this problem to be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your comments? Okay, can we resume? Sorry.
I'm going to back up one slide and revise my comment on the last bullet point here. I have learned that very recently there was a conversation with the teachers union, and they are very interested in conducting a staff survey this year. So we will definitely be looking into that and how we can make that happen. It may be a little bit more delayed, just given the timeline behind the student and family ones, but it's definitely doable. Benefits of Panorama, the reasons that we selected this company to do this, the questions that they have developed are research-based. It's a nationally benchmarked survey, so the survey results, as long as we're staying faithful to their model, are comparable to other districts around the country. They have a 2-week turnaround once the surveys are complete, and survey results are delivered in an online dashboard, which is much faster than we've been able to do in the past. The data are disaggregated, so we're able to look at racial and ethnic comparisons and other comparisons that we may load demographics for students on. In our contract with Panorama, we also have some professional development hours where we're able to use their expertise to coach our schools on how to interpret and use the survey results for school planning and other purposes. The next couple of screens are just some screenshots of some of their analytic tools and disaggregating reports that they have available. They, as I already mentioned, benchmark against a national data set. They also have the ability to capture themes via these word cloud diagrams to capture open-ended responses. And as I mentioned, they will disaggregate the data for us. For 2018-19, we are going to be sticking with the Successful Schools survey name so that is a familiar reference for families, although the survey content clearly has changed. We will be delivering now 4 surveys this year. The first is a family feedback survey that will be available to all PPS families. We will also have a student feedback survey that will be available for students in grades 5, 7, and 10 at all of our locations. And then we also have a social emotional learning survey that we are making required for 12 schools who are participating in the Caring Schools Community and Toolkit Pilot School program. The SEL survey items will also be available to other schools, but it'll be optional whether they want to participate. And then we can add a 4th bullet point on here for the staff survey. All of the feedback surveys, so the parent and student feedback surveys, will be anonymous. They will not be tied to specific teachers or classrooms, only at the school level. Each of those surveys will take between 15 to 20 minutes to complete at the outside. Surveys are going to be online and are cross-platform so that students or parents can use their mobile devices to take them, a computer. We will also have a limited number of paper surveys available for families in particular that may not have access to technology or that may just interact better with a paper survey. And all of these resources are translated into our supported languages. Whoops, this likes to go too forward. These are the topics that we've selected for the family survey. We had a work group together, including multiple pathways, student services, and some other representatives to determine the topics that we would focus on. Panorama's model is that they have these topics that can be selected, and within each of those, there's between 5 and 10 survey questions, and so those questions just come packaged with those topics. These are the broad topics that are available, and I believe we have the specific questions in your packets that you can refer to. Again, these will be available in our 5 supported languages plus English. The survey is available online and for paper where needed for families. The student topics,
Can I talk about
yes.
the survey one? So the family survey, we want to make sure that we are getting to all of the families that we can. And so we have really started to brainstorm a number of different ways to reach out to families to help the participation rate. And so we will be exploring more of those, going to school, family, communities, and then different groups of families, and as well as different community centers. So I just wanted to share that with you, that we'll be reaching out. We don't expect families to just either do it online or come into the school.
What has the participation rate been in the past? And what is your goal for this new?
Not
format?
very good.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact numbers. The family one, I think, was below 20%.
Yeah, it was.
Our goal, I believe Superintendent Guerrero asked that we reach at least 50%. Hopefully, hopefully we'll do better than that. We know we can, particularly with our students where we have a little bit more of a captive audience. But Harry, in a moment, will talk a little bit about the community or the communications and family engagement plan, where we have some strategies in place to help get that family
Dr.
participation.
Suggs, did you mention what our prior survey completion rate was in prior years during annual surveys?
I don't have those numbers with me, I'm sorry.
Right, I believe it was in the 20s.
For families, yes, below 20%.
So this will not be a random survey?
No.
Well, it's
So
not,
How,
yes.
how do you translate the results into something that's, scientific?
Well, that's definitely why we need a higher participation rate, in order to say that it's representative of the school or the district. We need a higher participation
Do
rate.
you really,
We are not using
obviously more is better than less, but
Yeah.
that doesn't really get you to that.
we are not using a scientific sampling methodology in order to either focus in on that from that angle, or to guarantee a certain generalizability, if that's the question you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be using this as a baseline year. We'll see how it goes, and then we can certainly explore whether we need to improve our approach in order to improve the generalizability of the survey results. These are the topics for the student survey. Again, grades 5, 7, and 10.
Just ask a clarifying question. So in the actual surveys, there was this 3 to 5 category and then 6 to 12. Are those grades?
Yeah, they're grade bands, yeah,
But we're just using 5th grade.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So the fifth graders will have the third through fifth band questions, and the questions are actually very similar. Most of them, there's just a slight wording change that's a little bit tailored to the lower reading level of the students. These are the social emotional learning topics that we've selected. Grit, growth mindset, self-management, social awareness, and self-efficacy. Oh, and emotional regulation. Again, 12 pilot schools, and this will be available to all students where schools would like to also ask their students to participate in this survey.
And in order to be part of the pilot, they had to agree to complete this survey for the 12 schools.
Okay, and
So you said that they're going to be available in our supported languages. Who's doing the translation?
Panorama is doing the translations.
okay. Can you explain what the pilot is?
We have 12 schools who are currently participating in the social emotional learning curriculum pilots, 6 of the caring school communities, and 6 with Toolkit. We need to provide an SEL curriculum to all students in our district. We haven't had anything, or we've had pockets of things here and there that principals have either developed on their own or have gone outside and purchase the curriculum. So what we want to do is we want to have a pilot to provide that data in regards to seeing the efficacy of the curriculum within our school communities. And then once that's done, our plan is to broaden that for next year. We need it desperately to teach pro-social behaviors, anger management, problem-solving skills, and to address some of the cyberbullying, bullying, harassment, intimidation, all of those things. So that's what we implemented last April or May.
So I want to go back to, have they used this tool in other languages? So is there data on the, validity of their translations?
Yeah, yes. They actually have their survey items translated into 30 different languages, and they are used across the nation. As far as data on validity and reliability, I would have to ask them that. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. Thanks.
Can I ask another question about this survey in particular? This can be done in 15 minutes? It's a little long.
Yeah. We piloted it in the spring, not exactly this set of items, but a rough similar number of items, and it was about that length of time.
Okay.
Here's a high-level project timeline we are presenting to you this evening. We've talked with the superintendent's leadership team, the Office of Schools leadership team. We have had initial conversations with the union, particularly around the staff survey. We'll be talking with PAPSA, and then in December communicating with schools and families. And Harry will talk a little bit about that plan in just a moment. The survey window right now we have scheduled to open on January 14th, and it'll be open for about 3 weeks. We have a little bit of flexibility in that timeline if needed, but that is our target launch date. And then at the end of that 3 weeks, we have about a 2-week period again for Panorama to get the results ready for us. And during that time, we'll be doing some professional learning in the schools and as needed in central office on how we want to use those results. And then in February, we'll have reports available for a number of communities, whoever needs to or has a desire to look at those.
A number of the questions that we selected align with our schools' improvement plans, their CAP plans. And so we're using a lot of this data for a number of different reasons. One for our SEL work, one for school climate, and then one also as additional data point in our school improvement plans.
Can I just offer an observation as from a parent's perspective? So I think it's great that lays out sort of how the surveys are going to, the timeline that's going to happen. I would be most interested in what actually happens after February, sort of how they're utilized in terms of support for our schools, or just, how do they then come alive, so that we have, if we have great data, how do we utilize it then? Because that seems like that's what's most relevant, not the actual when the survey happens, but like how do we incorporate that into the day-to-day work of schools or school teams?
Yep.
So
I think that's a great question, and that's part of the encouraging a continuous improvement culture here at PPS. We recognize we need many more data inputs and indicators. This is one that hopefully gets at the perceptions of our students and our families, and will incorporate staff. But I think you're right. It's not just collecting the data to admire it. It's actually to have conversations at the school community level around what do we attribute these results to. That could be to acknowledge good work that's happening or to identify some growth areas, but it also helps identify for us in central administration around, well, what are some high leverage things we can do to build school communities' capacities We definitely want to document those strategies in school level improvement plans, but also in district level improvement plans to really identify, well, what are some things we can make investments in to support cohorts of schools that, want to set some improved performance targets across different areas. Some of them might reveal themselves in the survey, but we already know family engagement is something we want to do better, and we have an effort underway to really put, a more systemic conversation in place there. And the other is something we've been talking about is how do we improve our student engagement and leadership opportunities as well. So this is going to be an important baseline for us. It's it's a survey that's given to millions of students. I'm quite familiar with it, and it's helpful in encouraging a lot of these conversations. So I think that's the right question, Director Brim Edwards.
Can I? Go ahead.
So I'm coming back to the randomness thing, because I think you're going to get who returns the survey is not going to be representative, I think, of our overall population. That would be my guess around all sorts of dimensions. And I'm wondering if you could build in a random selection. So how many families are we talking about, for example? Or do we have, we have 50,000 kids. Is that 40,000?
40-something thousand, yeah.
Okay. Could you build in a 2,000 selected random families and go after those? Don't have to answer that now, but that's something to think about. The other piece is I'm concerned that the barrier, well, you're asking about barriers to engagement. That's a negative. How do you ask, why not ask that in a positive fashion or more of a neutral fashion? I'm interested in why that's couched that way.
That's just one of the topic areas that's actually under Panorama's, basically their pull-down menu of the bank of questions that we can select from. So if you look under that, there are questions under there.
You can ask the communication question, for example, with family school. It could be, just rate your school in terms of communication, which is neutral as opposed to negative. So I just wonder if there's any kind of a bias that gets introduced with that. Just throwing it out for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those are
that's
great
good.
questions.
The other key question that when we did a parent survey, when I was with a nonprofit group 10 years ago, was what does your school do to help you support your student at home academically? And I don't see that there. In the 5 areas that we really focused on were, do you feel welcome at your child's school? There's at least one question called out there. What's communication like? We have 4 or 5 questions around communication. And then what do you hear about how do you help your child succeed? And again, some of that was rated, and some of it was, we had way more open-ended questions. And then a 4th was volunteer opportunities, and a 5th was decision-making, where we confirmed that 1 out of every 10,000 parents knows what a site council is. So I don't see decision-making down here either as a question.
We looked at we've done this, we've been looking through this bank of questions and sending it through a number of small groups to really look at the questions. What we were trying to do was balance how much information we're going to get and the time it's going to take away from students in classrooms. So it was really that balance that we were looking for.
So the family one right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But the same idea. We wanted to keep it relatively short. The other struggle that we have is we certainly have a lot of interest, even in the work groups that we had around customizing items, and we've done a lot of that in the past. In this case, in order to be able to use the benchmarking that Panorama has across the nation, we need to stick with their topics. They do give us the ability to add some items, so we have some capacity to do that. But again, we're trying to be sensitive to the length of the survey and the utility of the responses to those.
So in the work groups, did you have EL specialists, for example? Because when I'm looking at the questions, they're really they're complicated, and I'm wondering about what the translations look like, because we still might really have difficulty getting a good sample back from diverse families.
Is this the actual wording of the questions, or is this a sort of a generic?
No, the sample you have is the actual wording of the questions. I would have to check. I don't know that we have the translated version yet to look at, but we certainly could have people look at it.
Yeah,
Again,
I'd like
the
to
issue
look
is
at
that they've normed those data, so
They have,
if we
Well, that-
go adjusting the questions, then we remove our ability to have the national comparisons.
No, so I mean, this has been around, how long
Yeah.
how long has this been used, for example?
So as an example, we're having been a district leader in a core district where 1.1 million students took this survey. We were able to, when we came together, actually compare strategies across districts who were giving the exact same survey, and so we did a lot of work to engage and make sure that the sample set was representative and diverse, and a lot of the questions you're asking, Director Sparks, they're good questions because we do want to make sure we're hearing from across the demographic in our school district, and we don't want to customize it so much that then we can't actually
No, it's not about
sort of
customizing.
yeah.
But I hear you on the translation. We definitely need to take a look at those and see what our confidence is in both the readability and the fidelity of the translations.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask a question about the staff survey?
Uh-huh.
Sounds like this is new news that we're going to do this. So have you chosen the questions yet?
No, this is
Okay.
really new news.
Have you considered the relationship between our survey and the TEL survey? So is the
We've
plan to-
definitely talked about that.
I'll respond to that.
Yeah.
So yes, initially, we mostly have been focused on the student and parent survey. Very, very recently, PAT has indicated they'd like to have a conversation about staff participation. I let them know that initially we didn't include staff because of the TEL survey, and that we would use that for this year. We mostly wanted to administer to see, get some of this baseline data. We are having a discussion with them on Tuesday just to share the information about the the student and the parent survey information, and they want to have that conversation. So we've just initially informed one another that there was an interest there, but we haven't gone any farther than that at this point.
So we don't know yet whether the teachers are going to do the first year?
No. We just opened the question because we were assuming we were going to use the TEL information as that school climate information because it has that information in it.
And so that was the reason for not including the
Yes.
teachers, the TEL survey?
Yeah.
But you are including the teachers in the second year?
We don't even have a plan for the second
Oh,
year
I thought-
yet.
Okay, I thought it said somewhere in the materials
Well-
that it was $12,000 to include the teachers in the second year. And I didn't understand how you would handle a baseline. if you didn't have
We can
teachers in
add
the
them this
first
year for $12,000. We had that conversation late and had not had the budget when we did the initial contract to include them. But we're looking at definitely doing that now so
Okay.
that this would be a baseline year.
Okay.
And I will also just comment that the TEL survey is for teachers only. The Panorama staff survey really would be intended for all adults in the buildings. So you're getting more than what you would get only in the TEL.
And the conversation about other staff, we haven't even opened that conversation. So, I mean, just to be completely transparent, this is decisions that were made last year, and then we're just now getting to kind of connecting the dots on those things. So trying to inform and get all the information out, then we get more questions. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And just trying to keep everybody at the table and saying we can still discuss these things, but right now the two things that were planned for were for students and parents, given that we had done the tell before. And I can't really speak to it because I wasn't here when Laura Parker first, I think, started talking about this and working through this. I don't know when Brenda became engaged, but I think part of it was just to have a different survey and see what the questions were like, how it worked for us, and those kinds of things. I don't even know the original design around all the baseline questions that we had about a school climate survey. So we're connecting the dots at this point. So I'm just being transparent about that part. But we do have a really tight window to get this information, given that's an electronic assessment. So we're feeling pushed on that timeline as well.
And we're trying to get it out ahead of Smarter Balanced and other demands on students in the spring. So.
Okay, well, yes.
One final note, you've got a lot of questions that are him, her.
Yes, we raised that with them already. They're taking a look at it, but again, with it, they're evaluating whether that will change the validity of their constructs in order to make the more gender neutral pronoun references.
It's interesting because it's part of the demographic question. You would have thought.
Yeah.
But I got to make this point one more time. This is sort of a passive view of parent engagement, and it doesn't get at, and maybe this isn't what you're looking for, but what are we looking for? It doesn't speak to parents as actors in their child's education. It's about, does the school feel good? And those are important things to find out. I'm interested in something more than that.
For our communication plan, our full court press basically begins in a few weeks, where we'll be producing all manner of materials, from postcards to posters to lawn signs, just to make sure that people are aware. Our goal is to try to hit that 50% goal, make as many families aware as possible, and make it as easy as possible to take the survey. Each piece of collateral literature that we produce will have a QR code on it, so that if you're a parent, you can walk into a school, if you have that ability with your cell phone, and scan it and take the survey right there in your 15 or 20 minutes that you have. And then we'll be backing that by auto dialers, text messages. We'll essentially be doing everything we can, cajoling and nagging, to try to make sure that everyone is aware that this survey is there, why it's important to take it, and how the results will be used. We also know that they won't be meaningful if we're not hearing from all corners of our district, and so we've factored in as many ways as possible to hear from those families who traditionally don't lend their voices, such as those who speak languages other than English, those who have felt historically marginalized, and those who may be experiencing homelessness, among others. We're doing such things as segmenting Facebook posts, which allows the posts to go into the homes in the languages that the parents speak. We'll be doing community outreach to our partners and community-based organizations, from such as ERCO, Latino Network, SEI, and others, who might offer us greater access to families who don't typically participate in things like this. We've also reached out to our English as second language and dual language immersion leaders to make sure that our community agents are fully armed with this information, so that they can go out and even on one-on-one basis, help families take the survey. We've intentionally, in our messaging, kept it really short and simple. It's basically, help your school take the survey, results are confidential. We want to make it just as clean and clear as possible so that the translated versions are easy to understand and they
Yeah, see, that's
Yeah,
my
effective.
concern with the questions, that just the way that they're expressed right now, they'd be really difficult to translate. So that's always something to consider. It's like initially, what's the readability level in English, and what's the structure of sentences, and then once we translate that, is it almost does it match our community's needs and level
Okay, for
of
the-
understanding in their native language?
For our purposes, for our communications and our engagement, we're doing that translation and handling those messages. Except there's some materials that Panorama has done that's publicity and has been translated.
Yeah, I just keep going back to the questions themselves, so I'd love to see the data and look to see some, like the Spanish translation when it's available. That'd be great. Thanks.
That's all I have.
The last thing is, we also, Joe had talked about the fact that we'll have access to Panorama for some training opportunities so that we can help administrators with the data that we all receive by schools and by the district, which will be really nice that we actually have that support to provide some training, some coaching, and then just really how we're going to use that, how principals will use that, and then how we use that in the district. So
We're also closely monitoring participation rates during the survey window. We'll provide biweekly updates to our principals so that for the student survey, so that they can energize the students a little bit more if they're not quite there yet. And we'll also be watching family rates so that we can do additional outreach if we need to.
Just a couple quick things. On the outreach of the survey, especially for students, if it seems like it would be a good idea, the DSC could possibly help communicate the survey's important thing to take for students. I don't know. I mean, just going forward in the future, I mean, we'd love to help with that. If that be needed. Also, I might be a repeating question, but is the survey being sent to multiple pathways schools as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then just one final thing. So I'm trying to think of all students and the fact that, there's a lot of students in this district that, have learning disabilities, and so their ability to read the survey and take the survey might be difficult. So is there some sort of audio version of the survey? Like, what are the different paths that the survey can be taken, just besides the paper or the computer?
That's a great question. We've asked about the audio. I don't think we have an answer yet from them, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
and we've also looked at how we can provide the survey in some of our special ed classrooms, our learning centers. And then I've also talked with Columbia Regional Program about the potential of translating it into Braille or being able to provide an accommodation. So those will all be things that will be possible.
Perfect. Okay.
I think we've covered most of the content of this slide already. This is just around using survey results. We've talked through most of this, and I think, whoops, there we go again. Planning ahead, I think we touched on this already, but we need to identify a funding source for next year, but we would like to continue we need at least 2 years baseline in a year in order to evaluate whether this is getting at what we need to many of the questions that you've been asking, which are great. And then again, staff survey, we'll look at adding that this year and continuing that into next year.
Any questions?
That's it.
Can I ask, this is probably obvious, but we're going to allow parents to take multiple surveys, because a lot of families have multiple kids, different schools, so.
Yeah, there is no restriction on
Okay.
the number of times they can take it.
So I guess this is a more question, just sort of board process or district process. Will we, once we have the survey results, we'll have a presentation and
I want us to get into the regular habit of reviewing data on a quarterly basis, yes.
thank you.
First, you have to
That's our
have it.
plan.
But first, we gotta have it.
Yes.
I know. I want the answers, not the questions.
Okay, Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Okay, next up, Benson.
Can I ask a question of just, the objective of tonight's discussion? What do we want to come out of here with, or what's the process to map our way to a resolution? So we have a draft resolution, and I'm assuming we're gonna discuss that this evening, but knowing what the process is before we leave tonight, or
So we have a slide on objectives, but I think Guadalupe is gonna go over
Excellent,
the
okay.
superintendent.
I just want to make sure that
Guerrero.
we don't leave here tonight with, because we're getting shorter and shorter of time, of knowing what it is that the board needs to weigh in on, or
Sure.
how we need to engage.
Well, we're going to start off by reviewing a few objectives we're hoping to cover in the presentation this evening, which is, you know, a continued in the series of discussions around the Benson Master Plan, which we know infers a lot of other programmatic questions, which we've been having along the way, and our students and our families are raising as well for all those that are currently on the campus. But process-wise, we were hoping to sort of refresh once again our continued thinking and recommendation, and in the hopes of continuing to provide the board with additional information and clarifications and answers to questions that have come up. So tonight's PowerPoint actually kind of puts in bold sort of what those questions from our last conversation were, with the hopes that we have sort of the best information available for the December 18th vote. I'm opening up my talking points, sorry. I don't have a clicker.
Excuse me.
We thought we'd start with that beautiful front facade of the campus as we get into all the details and architectural drawings and all of that. Just acknowledge the significance and sort of the uniqueness that is Benson Polytechnic School, and preserving that as we create a 21st century modern facility to support the legacy of learning that has been there over time. So you'll see a few images here and there that I think are a good reminder for us. But moving into the objectives is, we thought it'd be important to sort of at least list out all of the stakeholder engagement that has taken place to date. We know that there's some next steps and opportunities, and we've initiated some of that conversation because there are other stakeholders that are on the Benson campus at this point, and so we want to continue to have those conversations. And even as we think about the facility master plan, there's going to be some continued questions that are going to require some collaborative thinking to resolve. There were a number of questions, so this is the next set of responses by a variety of staff, which you're going to hear from, an updated staff recommendation, as well as the accompanying resolution. And also note what continuing questions you might have tonight as we lead into the 18th. So those are our objectives for this presentation this evening. And we're going to share duties here from a variety of staff, including our own principal, Curtis Wilson, who's here with us this evening. Thank you on a school night.
I'll jump in first. We are definitely very appreciative of the stakeholders who have given their time and thoughtful input into the planning of this project. Over the past 3 years, the project team has met with dozens of user groups and hundreds of stakeholders, including students, educators, administrators, district operations departments, public agencies, district leadership, public involvement groups such as the Early Master Planning Committee and the Design Advisory Group, and industry partners, as well as held public open houses and even meetings in this very room where we invited everyone from the BSC to come join. And though it's been a lengthy process, the project has benefited from all of the involvement and has evolved recently to include input from new staff and industry partners. The master plan that is now presented is a reflection from the input of all these invested stakeholders.
And I would also like to add that we're embarking on our 3rd year of meeting. I want to say we started January of 2016 with our master planning committee, and that was a group of about maybe 25 or 26. We met for a couple of years, and now we've moved forward into our DAG process. And we had a lot of people that were interested in being a part of the DAG. It was a very cumbersome process to choose. I think we have maybe 26, 28, or close to 30 members on our DAG. And so the commitment from our staff has been huge. We have had staff members that have gone to pretty much every meeting that I have gone to over the last 3 years. That's how dedicated they are in making sure that the vision of Benson Tech continues to move forward. So, I definitely want to applaud those staff members and the students that are paramount as well in participating in these meetings. And some of those meetings take 2 to 3 hours to get through, but people have been engaged from the very beginning.
Just push Principal Wilson out of the way. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Cameron. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Public Engagement, and I am just getting my feet wet on this project as far as beginning to assist with the process of engaging multiple pathway programs in schools that are currently call Benson their home. And we were able to have one of those meetings that Superintendent Guerrero referenced earlier in the board meeting. But we are now at a point where we want to revisit some of the work that was done in the last couple years, especially around Alliance High School and other multiple pathway schools and programs. What I'm hearing and what I'm learning as I get to know some of this past work is that some of that dead-ended. And we are now at a point where we need information to make the next decisions in this, to keep things moving. And so it's now time to get back in front of these communities, learn more. So what that will mean is we have to make sure we know what are the key decision dates and what does that look like? What decisions have to be made? Because the purpose of getting in front of these communities is to find out what's important in order to make those informed decisions. So we'll be working closely with Dan Young and his team and the project manager and Claire and her team to figure out what's next and make sure that we're getting in front of folks. We've already initiated that process. Yesterday we met with Alliance at Benson and some key stakeholders. That will be the first of several in a series, and then we'll be reaching out to the other groups that are listed here on this slide. And this was just an effort to kind of talk about concentric circles when we reach out to different communities. We start in tight with staff and get information about programming and facilities information, and then that has extended to project planning groups, which is what Dan just talked about. That's taken place in the last 3 years. School and communities and stakeholders were included, but now we're expanding that into a broader circle and then into the general public as the project moves forward.
So since our last work session, we have gathered questions from the board, and we wanted to make sure that first we're addressing the questions that came forward in these 3 subject areas. Am I hitting the wrong button? You want to try?
Oh, wait, there
I
it
just
is.
did.
We
Oh,
got
no,
it. We got
no,
it.
we need to go back.
There we go. Okay, there we go. Good. You're all set.
So we have discussed 3 options and three possible options, and as we've reviewed them, questions arose from board and community. And we have our Senior Director of College and Career Readiness, Aurora Terry, who will respond to the programmatic questions, and I'll respond to the facility design questions.
So, as we discussed in a few working sessions, we've talked about sort of the three models, keeping with the current comprehensive CTE focus option that Benson currently has, looking at a hybrid option, and then the hub option. And so at this point, we don't think that there's a compelling reason to investigate a hub model or a hybrid model because of looking at the costs involved in shifting at this point, as well as looking at the history of the programming and the success that the current Benson model has. And in addition, we're starting a process for a big district-wide CTE review. And so in doing that, at that point, we could have more information as to why one of those models might be in the best interest of students. At this time, we don't have that information that would compel a big shift in the model.
Although, just to clarify that a hybrid model, the design could be essentially the same. It doesn't preclude a hybrid model if that's where our longer range CTE planning ends up.
Correct, from a building standpoint.
So from the building design standpoint, we are creating a 100-year building again, and what we know is when you looked at the front of that building that was built over 100 years ago, that things changed during that time. So what we want to do is create that flexibility in the facility to accommodate the program changes that are needed during that 100-year period.
When looking at the three different models, one of the reasons for having a hub is access for students to different programming. And again, in the current programs that we have, Benson doesn't have necessarily, it has three unique programs. So students in their current high schools have opportunities for CTE. And so again, moving forward, we can look at alternative programs, but at this time, it's not a compelling enough reason looking at the amount of time that's been and effort that's been put into the planning of the Benson design.
Was there a comprehensive focus option slide that we just skipped over?
Yeah.
So that was the question.
I just want to clarify something. You said that all the comprehensives, all the high schools have CTEs, therefore students have alternatives at their high schools, correct?
Correct.
Except for Alliance.
At Benson, correct.
Yeah. They do, yeah. We get the irony.
So he asked us to go back and just
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
Is this,
It's kind of self-explanatory.
yes. So these are, again, some of the reasons for us recommending keeping the current Benson model.
Okay, so going more, okay.
I'm sorry, the third bullet point, are you suggesting that we should have asked voters to vote on which option is the best?
Yeah.
You know, make your case, but really?
What are you trying to say?
Voters didn't approve a CTE hub or a hybrid model. It wasn't on the ballot.
No, nor did they
Nor should
approve
it-
Benson.
Nor should it have been. It's our job to determine the best educational model for kids, all high school kids in this district.
Yeah, and they did not, also did not approve a rebuilt Benson exactly in the image that it currently exists. So both are true. And to my mind, and I think your point, Scott, not really relevant. But anyway.
Okay, we're gonna carry on to the facility design question. So as we're designing this building, it has specific design features to make it flexible for modifications as student programming needs change. I think we spoke about that a minute ago. But for right now, we recommend continuing the process to build the comprehensive CTE focus option school. We are moving forward with the master plan with the footprint of a high school for 1,700 students. This needs to be approved in December to stay on track with construction timelines. We will have until March to make specific programming decisions. Okay. In a previous meeting or communication, we misspoke, and I want to clarify that the 15,000 square feet is needed to reach the size for a 1,700 student school, so it is not optional. It is included to reach that 1,700 student size school. So the staff is recommending the master plan budget. After going through the DAG and steering committee processes with a proposed $296 million budget.
So can we go back for a second to your point about the square footage? So the Benson ed specs are different than our other ed specs for comprehensive high schools in terms of square footage per student with certain asterisked allocations for CTE or for makerspace or for other uses. So can you talk a little bit about how the square footage per student is different at Benson and why we've arrived at the number we've landed on? Because obviously has huge bearing on cost.
Yeah, that's a great question. The square footage, of course, per student is larger because of the larger CTE spaces. What the ed spec contains is a number of different suite sizes that we talked about in a little more detail, a couple work sessions, or maybe it was the last work session. And those came about through these meetings that we've had over the 3 years, meeting with the different stakeholders and finding what the right size is for the different types of programs that exist now and could exist in the future. Specifically, that 15,000 square feet space, what that is, and we called it before, was future CTE space, which is terminology we shouldn't have used, because in the ed spec, it has an area program that identifies if it were to open today, with the programs are there today, what spaces would be used and what spaces would be unprogrammed, because the current capacity or the current enrollment is about 1,000 students. It's at 1,500 or 1,700 students. Those spaces would be occupied either with different programs or larger programs. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, but can you clarify, just because I don't have the notes right in front of me, what this square footage is relative to the current footprint? So 364.5 is what's proposed here.
It's very close to the current footprint. I think it's in the 360s as well, and Jen will probably yell at me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty close.
It's slightly smaller.
Slightly smaller.
And is some of that based on a lack of flexibility because of the historic designation? And
It's based on cost. We were at the size of the existing building, and we just we need to reduce it slightly to bring the cost down.
Yes. So as we look at, I wanted to review how we got to the $296 million figure. So in October 2018, when we brought the master plan forward, cost estimations are at $313 million. We know that we can, based on, we can reduce our design contingency. We have incorporated quite a bit of buffer from our last experience with our recent projects, and so we're safe in moving from a 15% to 12%, and the 12% is higher than what we've had in the past. We also know that we'll go through a value engineering process, and we've targeted 2.5% of hard costs to do that for another savings of $7 million. That brings us down to $298 million. In addition, the original budget included specific square footage for food, clothes closet, and a teen parent program. But instead of adding additional square footage for that, we're going to incorporate that into the square footage that we already have for the 1,700 student school. So by doing that, we're saving the $3 million in additional square footage. And we are also making an add. Our current ADA access to our field space on the neighboring park property. We want to have appropriate access for PE and athletics, as well as fire drill and egress from the building in case of an emergency. And that would be at $1 million cost, and that brings us to the $296 million.
So I'm going to ask the athletics question that we have for every project. So the two fields are on City of Portland property, and currently St. Mary's has a fair amount of the time rented. Do we feel with this configuration and what we're putting in the fields that we'll be able to meet our Title IX obligations? So we're not going back later and
Sure, good question. I can't specifically answer the Title IX obligations. I'll need some more information exactly what those requirements are. But for clarity's sake, the improvements to Buckman Field are not included in the scope of this project. Design of them is, but not improvements, partially because of the field's usage of other schools. For example, St. Mary's uses that field as well. And we also are looking the options of reconfiguring that so it meets the NCAA size, but we're not sure that that can even happen considering what the property size is.
So we do know that they will eventually need to be replaced, and it'll have to be a negotiation with the city. But at this point, it's not required in order to carry forward with the construction of the building.
So I would just hope that just our lesson learned from some of the other ones, that we would look at what the specs are, that you have the AD at the school look at the specs so that we, because if we're telling the community we're spending $300 million on Benson, that we can also share that we're looking at gender equity and all of our programming.
If I could just mention, aside from the fields, there are going to be considerable improvements to the interior, specifically access to locker rooms. Girls' access to locker rooms in Benson has been pretty horrible. Principal Wilson hides his eyes at it. And to other indoor sports that we think are going to really improve the situation. I should also mention that the Benson community and I are very grateful to the superintendent for having raised the issue of comparability to the other high schools, which made us look at the fields at all. Some real problems we have had with access had been completely off of our radar, and these could make a huge difference, particularly to student safety.
Just one other question about the, and I think maybe this is a Claire and Dan question. The new number is 298? 296. So the number that that was before the board when the previous board, when the that was voted on was 201, so, pardon?
202, sorry.
201 and 654,
Okay,
716.
sorry. I rounded up.
So so that's a 30% increase. I'm not a math person. Director Bailey, you can correct me. But so we've got almost $100 million more in addition to the, pardon? Thank you. Talk through the sort of the continued value engineering. So the same things that we ask of Madison and Lincoln to really continue to, while we want the schools to be 100-year schools and built as ed specs, how are we continuing to have this sort of tension also around trying to get the best value for our dollars, given the fact that it's so far over budget?
Sure, yeah. So we will continue to do value engineering throughout the life of the project. One of the things noted on here is we know that we're always going to do value engineering. It's just a part of the process. So we specifically call out a target that we have of 2.5% of the hard cost, which nets $7 million here. So that's one of the strategies that we're giving ourselves a target, which of course we'll look to beat, but we're calling that as something that we think is achievable. But we do that through a number of means. One is by when we get our CMGC on board, we'll be able to have a constructability review from that contractor who is invested in the project. We also do third-party constructability reviews where we bring in another contractor to take a look at the plans and just look for potential cost savings or things that could be done better. We do independent cost estimates, and we also, in certain cases, do peer reviews by other design firms. Similar process that we talked about last time with Lincoln and Madison, where we compared their costs by construction division to look at what that range is on recent projects that we've had to see if Benson lies within that range or if it is outside that range, identify why that is. Is there a reason that it's higher, say in concrete or in structural steel? And if there is, what's that reason? Or if not, is that an opportunity for cost savings? So all those methods that we've used on previous projects, we will continue to use.
How does the 2.5% value engineering target compare with other projects?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand, and I would hate to throw out something, but I can follow up on that and give some specifics.
Okay.
Just on the numbers, at some point before we get to the 18th, I mentioned to Deputy Superintendent Hertz that I'd like to get the the Bond Accountability Committee's point of view. So instead of having them come in after we approve something and provide their opinion, it would be great to have it on the front end. So if we can arrange that at some.
So we'll work with Chair Moore to work with the future board meetings to see what makes sense.
They're not convening before then.
That's correct.
Right, but I think this is the conversation we had before, that they felt constrained to not offer their opinion beforehand because of the charter for a variety of other reasons. It seems like if their responsibility from the levy, the bond was that they're to provide advice, it would be great to hear it before we actually vote.
I concur. Beforehand is better than afterwards. Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Director Brim Edwards, you had talked about the fields and the equity with Title IX, and you had referenced that something had happened in regards to other projects. Can you elaborate on that so we can have an idea?
So, for example, at Grant, the baseball field versus softball field. So the baseball field got baked into the original design, and thanks to the staff, afterwards we were able to bake in a softball field, which creates the equity. But at the beginning phase, that wasn't contemplated. So you were going to have a boys' sport have a field and the softball team not have one. And there's some similar things at some of the other schools at Franklin, what got finished and what didn't. So just on the front end, making sure that we're baking in, here's what the programmatic needs are for both, for all the sports, so there's equity.
So they were all sharing the same field. It was just that some programs weren't actually put into that design or plan, technically?
Dan may want to answer this, but
Okay.
the baseball field was baked into the larger plan on the school site.
Mm-hmm.
And the softball field, there were a number of options, but most of them weren't actually on the Grant campus. So one was at Wilshire Park and the other one somewhere else. And just the question of whether that's an equitable thing to require, why is softball having to go off-site versus the boys program being right there on the campus?
And
Yeah.
Benson's likely in the same scenario as Lincoln, where you're unable to meet the whole ed spec for athletic facilities. So just making sure that in looking at where those compromises are
Yeah.
being made is being done equitably.
Yeah, because right now we all share everything on one field. Baseball, softball, football, soccer, it's all on one field. Okay.
So there's probably an opportunity because St. Mary's agreement with the city was for a limited time relating to that field. And at the time that the field was done, PPS chose not to make an investment in the second field, and St. Mary's did, which is why they got the enhanced field usage.
So that'll be a future negotiation outside of this project, but something we hear the advice. Thank you. So one of the questions was the difference between a comprehensive high school ed spec and a focus option high school with CTE enhancements. What was the difference? And we did give a detailed analysis of that in the board packet to the board. And now we'll turn it back to Superintendent Guerrero.
So since initiating these discussions on the master plan, there was this question of, what are the different ways that school systems often play CTE programming in their school portfolio? And so we've talked about what each of those look like. Thank you, Dr. Terry. And in this case, particularly given the years that we're kind of down the road in some cases, but also given some past board direction also, and the engagement that's taken place, and given the programming that Benson has continued to offer, its staff's thinking that a comprehensive focus option high school with enhanced CTE programming is the direction to go. It affords us latitude as we survey and draft a more complete CTE plan for the future, room to enhance that with new pathways that meet industry projections and that will help to create options that we may decide we want to open up access to for other students in the school system as appropriate. But the program design is to proceed forward with what Benson is, and that's a comprehensive focus option high school. It may not be the full comprehensive, you might, as you see in the checklist around how it compares in different areas with other schools, but we think it's important to maintain sort of the equity lens around making sure there's some level of access for our students, whether it's in arts or any other area, who may attend the Benson Focus Option school. So option A remains the staff recommendation on program design. Facility-wise, I think you've seen the drawings and you've heard described that the facility contemplated is built in sort of a modular way with flexible spacing, sort of different sizes and with some support spaces, but that it takes into account that some pathways are pretty have space requirements given machinery or construction or things like that, but that the way that the design is looking, that it affords us opportunity to do anything we decide to do moving forward in those spaces, whether it's additional CTE pathways that we haven't yet imagined that would fit in the portfolio nicely given a plan, or if the decision is made to host other program placements or other co-located school programs or schools. So that's a decision that remains. Those are the first two recommendations, and you're going to see language that reflects these recommendations in a draft resolution for discussion.
Can I ask a question about the, option A? Given that recommendation, we've had a lot of conversation previously about how enrollment projections justify comprehensive treatment. So can you talk about how those considerations informed this staff recommendation?
Sure, and maybe some of the response to that question comes in the next slide here around considerations around enrollment, capacity, growth, and projections. One is we know it's not growing anytime soon, certainly not during construction, given the need to sort of work on site, or at least that's the plan right now, unless we have another solution for moving everyone off and speeding up construction. But we know we can't grow it in the meantime. What we've heard clearly, and we have a shared interest in doing, is monitor enrollment and attendance across all of our schools and really have a sense of the trends of entering secondary age students. We're in agreement that we want to sustain enrollment in all of our other high schools simultaneously, and the good thing is we control those levers. And so what hasn't necessarily been a tight function here in PPS is to centrally manage the dials on those capacities. And so we have the opportunity to do that, to make sure we're responsibly growing Benson enrollment over time when we're ready to do that after 2024, after
construction.
After construction in 2024. I've lost the audio. And also be mindful of the fact that we're very interested in making sure that our other comprehensives, particularly those that are just trying to get traction in their own enrollment, is allowed to flourish as well.
But just playing devil's advocate on that for a second, we do have levers to control our enrollment, how it's distributed, but not how many 9th through 12th graders there are in our whole system. So just to get down to brass tacks,
Right.
after construction, when you're looking at 2024, if we have 1,700 students in that building, what are your beliefs about the impact on our other comprehensive high schools?
Right. So we're not on the presumption that on the day it opens, we're going to flood it with 1,700 students. That's not an idea that I've heard certainly staff talk about in that way, because there is only a sum total of 9th grade students, for instance. And so the idea is, we've had discussion around what do the PSU projections say? What do the Metro Council projections say? We can study those, but I don't know that they're going to be accurate. 6 years from now, we may have a clear tally of the number of 8th grade students we have and how that distribution might need to be sorted in an equitable way as well.
And just a reminder that this is no different than what we've done in our other high schools. We're building capacity in our schools, and not all of them are full as we're building them. We're building capacity for the future.
Right.
So I think it's going to be important to have something like this with more specificity and and something that requires transparency of how the process works, because it's very hard for the community to understand how the process works, what the goals are, the impacts on the other high schools. It seems very opaque. So I think being really transparent about how we're going to approach it, and especially how we approach it in terms of we're just making significant investments in other high schools, that we don't diminish that as well. So I think that'll be an important framework, that we have much more specific sort of guidelines about how we're going to approach
Sure.
the sort of enrollment question.
Yeah, I don't know that you'll find sort of a described mechanism for how we're going to centralize a capacity setting process in the district, something I'm familiar with doing. But what we can do is signal that we recognize that's actually something we need to do, not just because of Benson, but because it's part of the broader work that we need to do for boundary review and program placement and all the other enrollment balances that we see and observe occurring across numerous schools, not just at the high school level. The good thing is that we have an RFP out, and that analysis will be commencing hopefully right after the winter break. And this is going to be an important part of the solution. There is, we know we're going to have a very transparent set of criteria and guidelines around how we move those dials around across schools in the district, whether it's high schools or information that we'll need to make boundary decisions. So I do agree that if we're going to say capacity will be adjusted, in a thoughtful way, we better be clear about what that means. And I think we share an interest in being able to do that so that it meets some clear goals that the board may have. It's the same conversation when we talk about, can a single strand of a particular program pathway flourish if we're not allowing it to grow? There's a whole series of questions I would add into that category of why we need to centralize capacity setting. Our own principals will describe for you how oftentimes that's worked out among themselves. I don't think that's necessarily a responsible approach, having set capacities class level by class, by grade level, by school in a district previously. And I think that's something we need to get a task force around and come and demonstrate to the board what a process like that can look like.
Yeah, I think Benson's unique in that its catchment area is the entire city, and we could do things like having a boundary process where their recommendation is we move 200 families from Grant to Madison, and then you have all of a sudden a flood of Madison students, catchment area students going into Benson, and you've defeated the whole purpose of the boundary. So I just think we have to think through it, because this has been the issue that for the last, frankly, 30 to 40 years has been the issue with Benson of, and not a negative issue to Benson, but just how it impacts the other high schools. It's been many times a safety valve for students who wanted to get out of their neighborhood high school. So I just think we have to be thoughtful about.
And we may decide to have a differentiated capacity setting process. It may be number of seats by cluster. That might be something that the information we glean from sort of designates that maybe that's an appropriate thing to do.
We also, though, can't let the past predict the future, because we have a lot of other factors at play, including, investment in our other comprehensive high schools that we already see with Roosevelt really drawing kids back to their neighborhood schools, as well as the growth of CTE in all of our high schools. So we don't know how that will affect demand for Benson, but we know that it will.
So those are all issues we're sensitive to. We want all of our schools to have the opportunity to grow and be successful and thrive. So the fourth area speaks to the program placements of multiple pathways and existing schools that are co-located on the campus. And as we've said a few times today, an important part of the equation around what's best, what kind of facility needs would really best serve all of our students is an important one to have. Listed here are some of them. You saw them earlier on the engagement list as well. And there's a few ways to go with that. One of them is, even as, if we were to move forward with the master plan and flexible modular, we could determine what goes in those spaces. That could mean a continued co-location, perpetually or for some number of years. But also, if there's an openness, we also want to be able to explore the potential of, as we hear from other stakeholders, and you could dream a little bit, since we did ask that question of our site leaders, what would a custom-tailored campus look like, in particular for some of our students who have very eloquently spoken around what their needs are out of a facility. And if we explore that and do a bit of analysis and feasibility around it, what kind of resources would that take? Is that a new dedicated building? Is that a reconfigured building? But more importantly, does it meet the criteria that our students are bringing up? Things like accessibility, central location, and some of the amenities that are going to be important to them remaining engaged and having success in finishing their K-12 diplomas. So that's a remaining. That's why you see the recommendation there sort of open-ended, because we're just at the initial steps of that process.
But, so reminder that it's the December deadline for the master plan for the building footprint, and then March deadline for the programs.
And just to be clear with those 2 bullet points, they're not mutually exclusive. You could also have a dedicated, custom, tailored, co-located option.
Well, it could be co-located on the Benson Complex property, i.e. maybe a new building on the parking lot, for example. Or it could mean literally co-located within the existing facility that gets modernized. So, I mean, these are the things that I think we need to brainstorm, and if, being open to finding creative solutions that actually would be a celebration for all communities involved. I think that's the goal we're sort of aiming for in these conversations.
Yeah, thank you, and I think it's just important to reinforce to the stakeholders there and the students in particular that any decision that we're making now, as you said, is not going to make a decision about their future, and we're still going to continue to very carefully study that with their input.
So those are the kind of the elements of the staff recommendation. I mean, the subsequent slides just provide some suggested draft language that you see appear in the resolution. One is just affirming, given all the option discussions around this being a comprehensive focus option, just to elaborate, that includes spaces for VAPA, visual performing arts, an array of athletics as much as is feasible. We know that that's a constraint on some of our campuses. This is a very dense property, as well as a lot of support spaces that I've heard are equitably important to have at all of our high schools. And so an example of that, for example, a pantry, teen parent center, et cetera, while you won't see dedicated new square footage, we've spent some time and partly in trying to find efficiencies is where can those spaces be integrated into the existing square footage of the design. So as an example, to try to meet as many of those high school ed specs that we would want to see at all of our high schools. Sort of an additional statement in the resolution draft is again around sort of that goal of the same one we have for all of our high school campuses, getting to that sort of capacity number in a responsible way. Obviously, we would maintain those enrollment levels for the next 6 years, and that'll give us a little bit of time, hopefully, with all of the other steps that we're taking to think about enrollment and boundary and program placement. We'll be in a much better place to stipulate sort of what an annual process will look like to responsibly sort of grow those high school attendance levels. We don't really know how dense the city of Portland will continue to grow. Hopefully it means a lot of clients for us, but hopefully we find ways to sustain all of our high schools as well as grow Benson over time. And we'll also hopefully have some deep new partnerships with industry folks where we know the sector is growing and we can decide to grow that CTE pathway accordingly. The other language is just to call out explicitly here is part of this process is to value all the stakeholders there. And so I know we've spoken quite a bit about that today, but our staff, students, and parents of all of the programs that are currently on the campus to learn more deeply around their instructional program needs. Clearly there's some more specific wraparound service needs that I would argue even today we could do better with and talk about what some of those options might mean. First one, a dedicated building. The other, a continued co-location, which would require some facility modifications, or to another PPS facility that meets that criteria that we hear stakeholders say is important. Things like accessibility, for example. This is a question that we've heard public comment and students speak to also is this notion of during the construction phase itself. We know we can only, during construction we can only maintain a certain number of students on campus. So whatever combination that is, But thinking to date would be there would have to be some relocation during construction, and I think that's a conversation that if we're open to having, can think about, how do we accommodate all students during the construction point. We know that there's some sites that will be available in 2020 and 21 within the school portfolio. They may not meet the criteria, but that's the discussion we need to have, or we may need to explore another location in the vicinity of the Benson campus. These are the things we need to look into, but we've got to do the engagement process to see what's going to work.
So does this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so I wanna just, push back a little bit on the word "is required." So I thought what I heard from students the other day, from the Alliance students is, in the scheme of things, why are they the ones that have to?
I'm right there with you. I heard
Um,
it. We heard it again tonight.
So I just think I'd like to see what the options are of them having the ability to stay there. I mean, I think, to me, it's not a foregone conclusion that they are the students that move, and what are the options? So what I heard very clearly, they shared with us a scattergram of where the students live, and Marshall's not in the center of anything. It's the outer, southeast corner of the district, and what I heard students say is, in effect, this, especially, for a 3-year time period, this would just be pushing a lot of students out of PPS. So I just want to challenge the "is required," not in a sense of there's any bad intention, but just maybe that was the original assumption, but I'd like us to think about it a little bit differently.
Again, this PowerPoint was submitted to you prior to our conversation. We've heard that loud and clear. Probably a better way to word it is some combination of students and programs up to 1,000 is what the temporary construction phase can accommodate.
Right.
And it sounds like there's an interest in figuring out how can we make that happen.
Because we also need to acknowledge that we're in a unique situation with Benson where, because it doesn't have a geographic catchment, enrollment of 9th graders is completely at our discretion. So there are a lot of different ways
There are a lot of ways to get to that number. The next resolution draft language there is some signal to the broader community, for valuing all of our students, our schools, and our programs is, hey, we know that we're going to require a bond campaign to complete the Benson campus construction. So that's something I think that we're all committed to. But I think equally, if there's a co-location or relocation involved, that we also honor the fact that there's other schools and programs there that may require some level of resource as well. And if we're going to do that for Alliance and the other alternative programs, we also have some other dislocated programs we don't yet have a long-term solution for that are living split temporarily right now already, and so don't want to be silent on that either. And we haven't talked about PISA at all, which fluctuates in an enrollment for many of our newcomer students.
Well, and really, as we get into the enrollment balancing across the district and looking at all school facilities and all programs, in looking at how, when we look at overall the number of facilities that we have and the size of the facilities and the number of enrollment of students, we have enough space. We just need to make sure that we're using it to the best of our abilities.
So I want to comment on this language. So one board can't commit a future board. So a board resolution that commits to something is not legally binding. And I think if we were to support something like this, it would be with good intentions, for sure. But, boards change, the economy changes, a whole host of things. And, I would be concerned that we would be making a commitment to something that we actually can't deliver on. We're going to have board elections. I mean, just a whole variety of things could change. And, you know, what a board passes, a board can unpass. So there's nothing legally binding on that. And I'm concerned that if we get in a situation where we, it seems like the easiest path, because then we don't have to sort of wrestle with the sort of co-location issue, but it may not be a feasible path, nor be something that we can promise to happen. And I think, you know, just on a much smaller level, the Roosevelt CTE space, which it seems like a small thing, but I can't figure out why the board voted to make it happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And I just worry that we'll take a group of students who have not been successful in other, or been successfully supported in other high schools, and promising something that we can't deliver on. So that would be my concern about that. And then I guess on just the third point, I would be reluctant to add other programs just at this time, because for the same reason that, so like access, but what about all the schools, the students who are not in middle schools now, so in outer southeast, you know, for example, I'd want to have them in that resolution if we're going to be saying what we're going to be committing future bond dollars to, because they're in a totally inequitable solution. So I'm not sure how access and PISA get in there, and yet we don't. I think it opens a broader conversation about what's going to be in it. And we name, in the last bond, we name planning for Cleveland, Jefferson, and Wilson. So I just put that out there as a concern of mine, and I don't think I could support that. I morally could support it, and I'm going to be on the board for 2020. But do we have the capacity to actually make that promise?
So all points true, Director Brim-Edwards. It's not binding. It's a pledge to communities. If having a more comprehensive conversation, obviously, around what specifically would be included in a bond campaign is still up for discussion, and there's probably a lot of other similar pledges around sort of what would be included there. But we wanted to note it here that in some fashion, we want to make sure that we're saying to all of our school communities that you're valued too, and if that involves some level of resource, are we prepared to commit it?
I mean, the alternative, the sort of the bird in hand, is actually putting them on the Benson campus and making it part of this project. I mean, that's probably the one thing that we actually we could say 100% we could control.
We will have a modular suite available that doesn't yet have a CTE new pathway identified, and if that's the decision of the board to temporarily or permanently configure the space, that could be a decision the board decides to make. Or is there a facility that could have amenities that would be, you know, better, obviously.
And so the closing slide is just reminder of the beauty of the building and the excitement of restoring a magnificent facility for our students in the future. It's just an exciting time for this community, and the building is already gorgeous, so just being able to restore it and keep it functioning for another 100 years is a great gift to our community.
Could you pause there for a moment? Director Anthony, would you mind expounding on the freeze there, what's happening? I can't help it.
That students pouring hot metal in the foundry. This is one of the few things pictured on the front that we are still doing at Benson. It also has students in the cobbler program that we used to have, and I think in the blacksmithing program we used to have. There's been a lot of changes, exactly like you were saying, and I think you expressed them very well. We have had a building that for 100 years has been able to evolve with the changing needs of our students and local businesses and industry, and we need a building that's going to continue to serve in that way for the next 100 years. And I'm so far very happy with the design that we are getting and the job that Bassetti has been doing for us. It really seems that we are going to get exactly what we need for the students, their future, and for Portland.
Well, and our challenge is to make sure that all of our schools and programs and students equally have a space that meets their needs.
So the rest of the slides are just slides of floor plans, but we don't have any specific comments on that. So.
Thank you. So I think it's now almost 10:15, and it's been a long day. But I think we're going to be looking at a vote on the master plan in 3 weeks. And I don't think we have scheduled another opportunity to hear about. So now's the time to ask any lingering questions.
One thing is, it seems pretty clear from this presentation that we have divorced the processes of considering alliance and multiple pathways location from the approval of this facility's design. But that's potentially worth talking about, whether we feel comfortable moving forward with the ed specs as they are, because the ed specs right now have gone into development without consideration of the accommodating the needs of the other programs in the building right now. So it is kind of a de facto direction if we allow the development of the ed specs to continue without accommodation of alliance. And so March as a goal for that programmatic decision is a little out of sync with the continuing evolution of the ed specs and the design specifications.
Is it?
Do you want to speak to, is there anything preventing us in March from taking what would be unoccupied space, being customized to serving, say, Alliance High School?
The master plan that's going to be put forward in December really largely sets the footprint and the layout. Now, there is some space in there that is unprogrammed space that could be used for any multitude, future CTE, multiple pathways, arts programs, whatever that is, and that shouldn't have any significant bearing on cost or schedule unless there's something that is just completely unexpected or wildly unique to those spaces. But there is constraints into that those are specific spaces. It's roughly 15 to 18,000 square feet when you break it out of what is available now. Again, there's also other components that could shrink or modify that could make more space available, but that's what we're really dealing with between December and March.
So are you saying that the space would be big enough to fit all of the multiple pathways, or just Alliance, or
I'm not saying that. We haven't engaged the
Don't know.
different programs and exactly what their space needs are. I think it's extremely likely that they'd be able to fit all of them, but we would need to engage with them to know what their needs are and how they might be able to conform to those spaces.
Right, I think it'd be important. So can we get that information soon?
So they
So,
did.
so that's the process that that's the process we're going through between December and March. Whether it's co-located at Benson, and if so, what are the needs? And if it's not co-located, then what are the needs? So that's the exact process that we're doing from December to March.
Well, except that if we determine that we don't need to make a solid decision on the programs until March, if that's the only space that's available, it's kind of like Amy's saying, we want to make sure that we have the option and the space is there that they need if we decide that we would keep them there.
Do you know how much space they have?
Well, I think what I would prefer is that if we're going to move
What do they have?
one or more of those programs by 2021, that it would be to a nice, permanent facility and not, well, we're gonna shove you somewhere, because
Absolutely.
we got to. And that may be possible for reasonably easy to do, like I know what I'm talking about. That might be more feasible for some of the programs that are smaller than some of the larger ones. So we may be able to,
So the 15 to 18,000 square feet that we're talking about is about the amount of space they have now at Benson. So it's a similar size. If they want or need more space than that, then the co-location in the campus is not likely. If they're if they want something that's a more expanded space, then it probably needs to be something then rather than in the current Benson master plan.
And you're talking about dedicated space, which doesn't include shared space.
Correct.
So
That is correct.
to what extent might those students be part of the 1,700 student
Right.
cohort?
Right, so
They
for
could
example,
be, yeah.
if the ed specs have a health center, cafeteria, teen parent center, I mean, all the sort of supports, like why couldn't those be shared resources? I mean, it doesn't, from a
can.
taxpayer standpoint, it doesn't make
Yeah.
very much sense to build like a whole replicate all those support services in like another building.
Well, from a student perspective as well.
Or, I mean, right,
Yeah.
just.
Right. So again, it's the engaging in conversation and processing with the community is what we need to do.
Part of it also is that co-location hasn't worked very well at all. From the viewpoint of, for example, Alliance Kids.
Right.
And even in the next 3 years, I think that is a huge issue that we need to take on. We've heard that loud and clear.
Absolutely.
So I guess, and I don't want to speak for the students who spoke the other day, but it's not really a co-location. It's sort of like, this is your hallway. I mean, it's not,
exactly.
it wasn't set up as a,
Shared.
you have equal standing in the building. And so I would suggest that, so even with that, their preference is still to stay in the Benson.
Is it to stay in Benson or to have a centrally located facility and
To
Benson
stay in
is the?
Benson.
Well,
I mean,
Well, I think we've had, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to date we have had one meeting
Yeah.
with a very small sample of Alliance students and staff and one parent. I think these are questions that we should table right now because we are not in a position
Yep.
to make a decision about this.
I absolutely support Chair Moore's recommendation on waiting till we have more information. I do want to correct one little bit of misinformation. There was more engagement done by Karina Wolf and Paul Cathcart back in 2015, 2016. And what we need to do is really look at what was collected then and validate how accurate is it still for today. And I think that's some frustration that we did hear and that we will hear from these community members that, what did you do with what I told you before? And that's why I mentioned earlier that process dead-ended. And I think we're all aligned when we say, we know we make better decisions when we're informed. We think it's important to hear from every community member we serve. And I know we don't have a great track record of doing that. And I say this often, it's why I came here. I want us to do better. This is an opportunity for us, and I hope that we take advantage of it. And we did hear just yesterday from a number of really passionate students and teachers. And I think it's heart-wrenching to hear when, and I just joined the district, but I'm the district now. So the mistakes of the past I kind of go in there like we own them. We owe these students more time to hear what they have to say, and the board needs to know that information before making a really big decision. So that's what's next, and we'll be sharing with you what those opportunities are to join us for those conversations.
Great, thank you.
I think the primary focus of what I'm trying to understand is, what I don't want to have is we make a decision, then all of a sudden we've actually made a decision around Alliance.
Right.
Unintentionally.
Right.
And so when we vote on the 18th, if we're actually eliminating any possibility of Alliance staying there or having some presence on the Benson campus, like we can't have this facade of we're going to get community impact January to March, but we made a decision in December where it's not going to happen. So it's going to be really important that we not close off options, because otherwise then we're not really listening to them. I mean, I thought the students asked a great question, which was, so we told you what we needed. You put a bond on the ballot, but you didn't actually put anything on the ballot for Alliance.
It didn't speak to it one way or the other. It didn't include it or exclude it, and the call was, and that was always an open question that was awaiting further staff response. It wasn't an exclusion.
But the expectation that they were going to be moved out certainly meant they were part of the bond.
Well, I'm not sure that, so I'd like to see the language.
There wasn't an
But so I think it's like the unintentional leaving them behind. So like they weren't intentionally put it. So if they said, here's the separate building we want or something, and then we had a bond and we knew that potentially they were going to move, but we didn't actually put money in the bond.
So can I put this in the form of a question that we might be able to get an actual answer to? Between now and December 18th, can you analyze whether the current master plan would be able to accommodate Alliance?
Yes.
Okay.
And also, Principal Wilson, so the DAG still does not have representation from the Alliance community or multiple pathways, or has
That is
been?
true.
Okay.
Okay, so the other question that is hanging out there, Alliance is not the only other program that is on the
Right.
Benson campus.
Correct.
So what are we doing for them?
We've already initiated, we've sent out requests to get started on the same kinds of meetings like what we saw yesterday. And what I want help with from each of these communities is helping us map out what does that engagement plan look like between now and March, because for me to put a plan together without some input from them seems a little bit like in the same vein of what we're trying to avoid doing. So it's to start these conversations and to say what's next, who else should we be talking to. And I want it to align with Dan's, the decision-making in Dan's planning. Like, what is it we want to be informed about? What's helpful to make sure we know how it would be useful in decision-making? So that's work we'll be doing in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, so I think the other thing hanging out there is, especially given these other programs, what other facilities, what other options might be available?
But
I
that's
mean,
a whole
okay.
big process.
Probably can't get
Right.
detailed information by December 18th.
No.
But I think it would be helpful to get even a ballpark
That's
answer.
what was in the slide tonight, was two possibilities.
Okay.
For multiple programs.
Starting a needs assessment for each of those programs in terms of.
Well, we're really trying to look
Size
at
and
it holistically for the whole district. And I know the timing is out of order.
Right.
But it's the order that we have. But we are looking at that starting in January, going forward to the following January, looking holistically at all of our facilities and all of our program needs. So that will be incorporated in that process. It just isn't in time for the construction decision that needs to be made for Benson.
Okay. Any other questions?
So I guess just to add on to your question about Alliance, so the same thing. for all the rest of the multiple pathways.
Yes.
So by the 18th so that we're not unintentionally making a
Yes.
decision.
Right. Totally agree.
So we're going to do our best to get in contact with them, knowing that we may be challenged to get a solid group of folks together in time to inform the 18th, but we will definitely reach out and analyze past data as well.
Well, it's really,
It's more of a
it's the square footage capacity and and
Right.
placement.
Right.
It is not the engagement. The engagement, we still have time. It's
Right.
not December 18th as a deadline.
But as far as
We're
programming,
just,
yeah.
we're just wanting to make sure that we're not precluding any options.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So the last thing that we would need from the board is the draft resolution. I heard some comments tonight. We'll take those comments under advisement and come out with another draft. And I'll go ahead and share that with the board leadership at the next planning session. And then I do recognize that the full board would want to see that. I just want to be careful not to conduct board business outside of the proper channels.
So just given the shortage amount of time, I think we have a work session on, next week?
Yeah, the
That
third.
we have that, so in addition to all the board, but also the community. So again,
Yeah.
just to be completely transparent so that people know what
Sure.
it is that we're,
It's impossible for me to have it ready for tomorrow morning's board packet, though.
totally understand.
Okay, and I also
Let
want
it
to.
be noted that I
That's at
said I was
least, like,
okay.
8 hours.
Okay, but I also want to note that we've got a full agenda already next Tuesday, so we're not going to be able to devote a tremendous amount of time to
Well.
wordsmithing a resolution.
Here it is, send in or
Right.
start forming your amendments. I mean, really.
Right.
Well, and we should have some mechanism by which the public sees this, and if people are gonna have amendments, that there's some visibility to it, so that.
We'll
if
make
people-
sure it's posted.
If people wanna have
It'll just be
comment on it, they
posted
can.
late. It won't be tomorrow. It'll be posted late.
yeah.
That's all. But we'll post it.
It will be posted,
Yeah.
Send your cards and letters and,
So if the board would,
And
if you
phone
have
calls.
anything that hasn't been mentioned tonight that you're expecting to be incorporated in the resolution, I would need to hear from you probably in the next 24 hours would be great.
Duly noted.
okay. Great. Nick wanted to.
It kind of seems like a very basic question at this point, but this might be more for Bassetti as well. But was there square footage allocated for more gender neutral bathrooms in the floor plan? There was. Okay, just to make sure. Gotcha. That's it.
Scott?
So as kind of Mr. Cranky Pants, I think is what term Paul has used over time. I apologize for being cranky earlier. My crankiness is not with the staff work, which, I think this is going to be a great school. There you go. What Claire mentioned about, our timeline is out of whack in about 12 different ways. And in my dream world, we have enough time to really look at the educational models and come to a decision that may be, yeah, this is the best model. We don't have that. It's not going to happen. It's too late in the game. I'm mourning that, so that's what I'm going through, because I passionately care about CTE provision for all students in this district. And I see I see a possible option that might be both better value for taxpayers and serving more kids with more CTE space that I'm watching float away, because it can't happen now. It just can't. We don't have time to do that other than delaying things and really disrupting a whole lot going on.
Well, the good news is sticking to that timeline is also in good service to voters, because delaying would cost additional, would cost the project more. So
Unless we have a recession in 2020 and our crazy construction costs drop 50%. which I would not wish for a recession. I would wish for a moderation of construction costs in any event, and maybe return to sanity instead of the craziness we have. But thanks for putting up with me.
And I have a quick request from all of you. One of the things we heard yesterday at the Alliance meeting, or just what it told us, is there's not a full understanding from a lot of these students or teachers about what our process is, or where we are in the process, or how this was not included in the scope. You're going to get questions as we start to bring people forward and get information from them, and we would love it if you could help them understand that process and kind of how we got to where we are. Because I know they'll have questions about that, and we're going to work from this end to try to help give them that information as well.
Okay, last call. Any other questions?
Chair, we do have one person signed up for public comment.
Okay, well, let's finish this first. Any other questions? Okay, if you do, send emails. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, public comment.
He left.
Is he gone?
I believe so.
Outlasted him.
Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.